My name is Walter Greer, and I am 68 years old. I spent 40 years of my life building things with my hands, houses mostly, some commercial, a few schools. I believed in straight lines, solid foundations, and materials that don't lie to you. Wood is wood, steel is steel, what you see is what you have. I thought you have. I thought people were the same way. I was wrong about that. 3 weeks ago, my daughter drove me to a pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication. When she stepped outside to take a phone call, the pharmacist leaned across the counter, looked me dead in the eye, and said 6 words I will never forget for the rest of my life. Before I tell you what those words were, please take a second and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And if you believe a man's dignity is worth defending at any age, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. It matters more than you know. It started 2 months before that pharmacy visit, back when I had what my doctor called a cardiac event. That is the polished medical way of saying my heart threw a scare into everyone, including me. It wasn't a full heart attack, but it wasn't nothing either. I spent 2 nights in the hospital, had some tests run, and came home with a small paper bag full of new medications and a list of lifestyle recommendations that made me feel about 112 years old. My wife, Margaret, would have laughed at that list. She would have read each item out loud in a dramatic voice and then made me a big pot of her chicken soup and told me the soup was worth more than all of it combined. But Margaret had been gone for 2 years by then. Pancreatic cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the last morning I held her hand. The house on Birchwood Lane had been quiet ever since. My daughter was at the hospital within 4 hours of my being admitted. She drove 3 hours from the suburb where she lived with her husband and their 2 kids, and she sat beside my bed with red eyes and a tight jaw and told me I was not going to spend another night alone in that house until I was completely stable. I told her I was fine. She told me I was being stubborn. We had that same argument twice more before I finally agreed to stay with her for a few weeks, just to get back on my feet. Just until the doctors were satisfied. That was the story I told myself. Her house was large. That was the first thing I noticed. Not large in the way that a family fills a space and makes it feel full. Large in a way that felt designed to impress before it was designed to be lived in. The ceilings were high, and everything beneath them was pale and cool. All muted tones and expensive-looking surfaces that probably had names like alabaster and slate. There were 2 cars in the driveway that were newer than anything I had ever owned. My daughter and her husband, Derek, had done well for themselves, or so it appeared. That qualifier would become important later. Derek greeted me at the door with a handshake and a smile that worked like a light switch. On and then immediately calibrated to exactly the right wattage. He was 41 years old, wore clothes that fit too well for a Tuesday afternoon at home, and had the easy, practiced warmth of a man who sold things for a living, which he did. He was a financial advisor, senior partner at a firm downtown called Simmons Cutler Wealth Management. He talked about money the way some men talk about sports, fluently and without realizing not everyone cares as much as he does. "Come in, Walt," he said, taking my bag from my hand before I could protest. "We've got everything set up for you. You just relax and let us take care of things for a while." He said, "Let us take care of things as if it were a gift." I said thank you, and meant it. I was still thinking he was on my side. The guest room was spotless, which was fine. There was a small television I didn't ask for, and a bouquet of flowers on the nightstand that my daughter had clearly placed there because she loved me. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at those flowers and thought about how lucky I was to have her. That thought felt like a clean floor before a flood. The first sign came 3 days into my stay. Derek knocked on my door in the evening and came in carrying 2 glasses of something amber over ice. He handed me one, settled into the chair by the window as if he'd been invited to, and began talking about the future. My future, specifically. He had been thinking, he said, about my situation. The house on Birchwood, the rental property Margaret and I had owned since 1998, the life insurance policy that had paid out after her death. These were significant assets for a man living alone, he said. Significant assets required proper management. He had some thoughts. I sipped the drink, which I didn't want, and listened to him talk. He used a lot of words I knew individually that became slippery when he arranged them together. Liquidity and consolidated portfolio management, and streamlined estate planning. He made it all sound like tidying a closet, something sensible, something overdue. At the end of it, he slid a folder across the bed toward me. "Just some preliminary documents," he said. "Nothing to act on tonight. Just read through when you have a chance." He was smiling the whole time, relaxed, unhurried, the way you are when you already know how something ends. I picked up the folder after he left and opened it. There were pages I didn't fully understand. I closed it and set it on the nightstand next to Margaret's flowers and lay back, staring at the ceiling. Something was pulling at the back of my mind, small and persistent, like a loose nail in a board you can't quite locate by sound. That feeling grew over the next week. Derek began mentioning the documents again, casually, the way you mention something you've brought up before and are beginning to wonder why it hasn't been addressed. Once at breakfast, while I was still in my bathrobe. Once in passing, when he returned from work, he framed it differently each time. Estate efficiency, protecting the grandchildren's future, making sure nothing ends up in probate. Each version was a different door into the same room. I kept not walking through any of them. Then my daughter started. It was softer coming from her, more intimate, more careful. "Dad," she said one evening while we were watching television, "Derek just wants to make sure you're taken care of. He does this for clients every day. You'd be paying a stranger thousands of dollars for the same advice." She rested her hand on my arm the way she had done since she was small, and I felt a pang that was almost physical. This was my child, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest watching Saturday morning cartoons. I wanted to believe she was only worried about me. I wanted it enough that I almost missed what her eyes were doing. They weren't soft the way her voice was. They were watchful. I said I'd look at the papers again soon. I said I appreciated everything they were doing. Then I went to my room and sat with my hands on my knees and thought about the nail in the board. It was a Wednesday when we went to pick up my prescriptions. My daughter drove. The pharmacy was one of those large chain stores, brightly lit, the kind where half the aisles are not medicine at all but chips and greeting cards. I went to the pharmacy counter while she waited by the entrance, answering a text message. The pharmacist behind the counter was a man in his late 50s, heavy-set, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the particular unhurried patience of someone who has repeated the same instructions 10,000 times without losing his care for them. His name tag said James. He pulled up my file, confirmed my name, and began reviewing the prescriptions with me one by one. He looked up from the screen and said my name again, not as a confirmation this time, but as a question. Walter Greer. He studied my face with something I couldn't immediately identify. Then he took his glasses off and cleaned them and put them back on and said quietly, "Are you Margaret Greer's husband?" The sound of her name in a stranger's mouth caught me off guard, the way it always does, even now. I told him yes. He nodded slowly and looked past me toward the entrance where my daughter was still looking at her phone. He came around the end of the counter, just slightly, and lowered his voice to nearly nothing. "Mr. Greer, I need to say something to you, and I hope you'll take it the right way." He paused. "Your wife was one of the kindest people I have ever met in 30 years behind this counter. She used to come in every month. We talked. She told me about you, about your work, about Birchwood Lane." He looked at the floor for a moment. "A few weeks ago, a man came in asking about your prescriptions. Said he was your son-in-law. Said he was managing your affairs. He wanted to know about your medications, how they affected cognitive function." He used those words specifically. Cognitive function. James said it plainly, without drama, watching me the way someone watches a person standing near an edge. I understood what he was telling me before he finished. Someone was building a case that I wasn't all there. Someone wanted documentation, the kind of documentation that could be useful in legal proceedings, the kind that could support a petition for guardianship or power of attorney. I stood at that pharmacy counter, with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and felt the floor of the last few weeks tilt beneath me. I thanked him. I kept my voice level. I picked up my medication and walked back toward my daughter with a smile on my face that cost me more than she will ever know. She looked up from her phone and asked if everything was okay. I told her the pharmacist was very thorough. She nodded and we walked out into the parking lot, and she talked about dinner the whole way home, and I said just enough to seem present. Inside, I was somewhere else entirely. I was thinking about Margaret. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in the guest room with the door closed and the lights off, and I thought through every conversation with Derek since I arrived. Every casual mention of the documents, every reassurance that it was all straightforward. I thought about my daughter's watching eyes. I thought about a man coming into a pharmacy asking about my medications and their effect on cognitive function. I thought about what a contractor knows that a financial advisor perhaps forgets. That the weakest point in any structure is where someone assumed a joint was solid without checking. At 11:30, I turned on the small lamp on the nightstand and opened Derek's folder again. This time I read everything, all of it, slowly, from the first page to the last. I was not a lawyer, but I had signed enough contracts over 40 years to know when language was being used to obscure rather than explain. On page 9, buried in the middle of a paragraph about asset consolidation and fiduciary management, there was a phrase. I read it 4 times. Limited power of attorney with respect to real property and insurance instruments. I read it a 5th time. Then I put the folder face down on the bed and pressed both palms flat against it. Limited power of attorney. The rental property on Garfield Street that Margaret and I had owned since 1998. The life insurance policy that paid out after she died. $240,000 that I had not touched because touching it felt like admitting she was really gone. Derek was not trying to help me manage my assets. He was trying to get control of them. Every visit to my room, every dinner table conversation, every expression of concern had been architecture. A structure designed to deliver me to a signature. My hands were not steady when I picked up my phone, but my mind was. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Patricia Connolly. Pat had been Margaret's friend since college. She was a retired attorney who still kept her license active because, as she once told me, she had worked too hard for it to let it gather dust. We had not spoken in almost a year, which was entirely my fault. Grief has a way of making you retreat from the people who knew you when you were whole. I did not care about the hour. I sent her a text message. Pat, it's Walter Greer. I need your help. Something is wrong and I need someone I can trust. Her response came in 4 minutes. I'm awake. Call me. I went into the bathroom and ran the faucet quietly and sat on the edge of the tub and called her. She answered before the second ring. Her voice was the same as it always was, straightforward and warm, the voice of a woman who had no patience for anything except the truth. I told her everything, not just about the documents, but all of it. The folder and Derek's visits and my daughter's eyes. James at the pharmacy and the questions about my cognitive function. The rental property on Garfield and the insurance money. I laid it out in order, the way you explain a structural problem to someone who is going to help you fix it. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Walter, what Derek is attempting is called undue influence. Depending on how far it has progressed, it could also constitute financial elder abuse under state law. What he is not, under any circumstances, is someone you should allow to get his name on any document related to your assets. Don't sign anything, not 1 page. Do you understand me? I understand, I said. Good. Can you photograph those documents and send them to me tonight? I can, I said. She gave me her email and told me to take my time, be thorough, get every page. Then she said something that stopped me cold. Walter, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Has Derek had any contact with your accounts already? Any access at all? I thought about it. I had been sick. I had been in the hospital. There had been a moment when my daughter asked me for the login to my online banking, just to keep an eye on things while I was admitted. She had said, just temporary. I told Pat. Another silence. Longer this time. Okay, she said. I want you to access your accounts tonight if you can. Write down every transaction you don't recognize from the last 60 days. Will you do that? I would. We hung up. I sat on the edge of that tub for a while, alone with the sound of running water and the particular weight of a man who has just understood how badly he has been underestimating the danger he is in. Then I stood up, went back to the bed, and started photographing documents. What I found when I logged into my bank account an hour later was worse than I had feared and better than it could have been. There were 3 transfers I did not recognize. Not large amounts, nothing that would immediately alarm a busy person glancing at a statement. But they were there, steady, methodical. The kind of withdrawals a careful man makes when he is testing how much he can take before someone notices. I wrote down every number and every date in a small notebook I found in the nightstand drawer. I sent everything to Pat at 2 in the morning, and then I lay back on top of the covers, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I was not going to confront anyone. Not yet. Confrontation is what you do when you want to end something quickly at the cost of winning it cleanly. I wanted to win cleanly. That meant playing a different role for a little while. It meant becoming what they already believed I was. Starting the next morning, I was a tired old man. Not dramatic about it, nothing that would seem calculated. Just a little slower, a little more uncertain with words, a little more grateful for help I hadn't asked for. I let Derek explain the television remote to me, even though I had been using remotes since before he was born. I confused the names of his 2 children once at breakfast, which was something I would never actually do, and I watched his face carefully when I did. There was a flicker there, something he covered quickly but not quickly enough. A tiny private satisfaction. I filed it away. My daughter watched me with different eyes than Derek did. Hers were complicated. When I fumbled for a word at the dinner table, Derek looked like a man watching a stock price move in the right direction. My daughter looked like a woman who was trying not to feel what she was feeling. That difference mattered to me then, and it matters to me still. I became furniture. I sat in the living room during the evenings while they talked around me and through me, their voices dropping briefly when they remembered I was there, and then rising again, as they apparently decided I wasn't following along. I was following along for every word. Derek was on the phone one afternoon in his office with the door most of the way closed, and I sat in the hallway with a cup of tea. I wasn't drinking, and I heard him say to someone, "It's almost done. Ray, the old man's coming around. Just give me the rest of the week." Ray. Raymond Cutler. The other name on the door of Derek's firm. I went back to my room and called Pat again. She had spent the day on my documents. Her voice, when she picked up, had the particular quality of someone who has confirmed something they hoped was wrong. "Walter," she said, "your son-in-law has a problem, a significant one. I need you to sit down." I was already sitting. I told her to go ahead. "Raymond Cutler," she said, "is not simply Derek's business partner. He is also the co-signatory on a private investment vehicle that Derek has been managing, or mismanaging, for the last 3 years." She had found a filing, a civil complaint from 18 months ago that had been settled quietly, and was therefore not easy to locate, but was absolutely public record, if you knew where to look, which Pat did. The complaint described a pattern of clients being steered into high-fee, high-risk instruments that benefited the managers more than the investors. There had been a settlement. There had been non-disclosure agreements. There had been no admission of wrongdoing, and there had also been, Pat said, a substantial amount of money that Derek's firm was still obligated to repay to certain parties. "And the rental property," I said. "And the insurance money," she exhaled slowly. "The limited power of attorney in those documents, if signed, would give Derek, and by extension his firm, fiduciary authority over your liquid assets and your real property. In plain terms, Walter, he was going to use your money to help cover what he owes. With your signature on those papers, there would have been very little I could have done after the fact. Very little anyone could have done." I sat with that for a moment. 40 years of working. Every job bid correctly. Every invoice paid on time. Every material sourced honestly. Margaret and I, saving for 20 years to buy that rental property on Garfield because we wanted something solid to leave behind. The insurance money that had been sitting untouched because I couldn't bring myself to spend what felt like the last evidence of her life. All of it. The target of a man sitting 40 feet down the hallway in a nice office talking on the phone about how the old man was coming around. "Pat," I said, "there's something I need to tell you about Margaret. Something she told me before she died that I didn't understand at the time. I told her about the last month of Margaret's life. about the things she had said when the medication made some days clearer than others and some days harder. She had told me, in the particular urgent way of someone who needs to be heard before the time runs out, that she had done something practical. She used that word, practical, which was the most Margaret word in the world. She said she had made an arrangement and that there was a letter explaining it, and the letter was in her Bible, the old one with the cracked spine that her mother had given her, which was in the third box from the left, on the top shelf in the hall closet on Birchwood Lane. At the time I had nodded and held her hand and told her I would find it when I needed it, and hoped she would rest. I thought she was managing her anxiety, doing what organized people do when they sense the end of their ability to organize. I had not opened that Bible in 2 years. Pat was quiet for a very long time after I finished. Then she said, "Walter, I think we need to go to your house." Getting to Birchwood Lane required a reason that Derek would accept without suspicion. I used the same currency he had been using on me, sentiment. I told my daughter at breakfast that I had been dreaming about the house. Then I kept thinking about a toolbox I had left in the garage, tools that had belonged to my father, and that it was bothering me in a way I couldn't shake. I made my voice a little thin, a little lost. She looked at Derek across the table and he gave a small nod and said, of course, they would take me over on Saturday. My daughter drove and Derek sat in the front passenger seat and I sat in the back, like a child being taken somewhere for his own good. The drive took 20 minutes and nobody spoke much. When we turned onto my street, the oak trees were bare and the light was flat and gray, and the house looked the way houses look when no one is living in them. A little receded, a little like a held breath. My chest did something complicated. Derek unlocked the door with the key I had given my daughter months ago. For emergencies, he said, was a fine reason to have. And the smell of the house came to meet me the way it always did. Dust and old wood and the faint trace of the lemon oil Margaret used on the baseboards twice a year, and the particular stillness of a space that has been loved and is waiting to be loved again. Derek looked around at everything with the eye of someone calculating square footage. My daughter looked at nothing in particular and said, "It was good to be here, wasn't it?" I said I needed to get to the garage for the toolbox. Derek offered to come with me. I told him the garage was a maze, and I knew where everything was, and I'd be more useful going alone. He accepted that. I walked through the house to the garage door, and then I did not go to the garage. I went to the hallway closet. The boxes were exactly where Margaret had told me they would be. I pulled over the small step stool we had kept there for 20 years and climbed up and found the third box from the left and opened it, and there was the Bible, old and worn and cracked along the spine, exactly as she had described it. I held it for a moment with both hands, and the weight of it was almost unbearable, not because it was heavy, but because it was hers, because her handwriting was in the margins of certain pages, and her bookmark was still there from the last time she read it, and the last time she read it was while she was still alive. I opened it. Inside, folded in thirds and tucked against the back cover, was an envelope. My name was written on the front in her handwriting. I stood in the dim hallway closet and opened it with hands that were not fully steady, and I read what she had written. She had found a lawyer, an estate attorney named Harriet Cole, 18 months before her diagnosis. She had found her on her own, without telling me, because Margaret, practical Margaret, had known that Derek was not who he presented himself to be, even before I did. She had done what she described as a little research, which I suspected meant she had done a great deal of research and simply didn't want to alarm me. What she had found was enough. She had worked with Harriet Cole to transfer the beneficiary designation on her life insurance policy from our joint estate into a separate, irrevocable trust. The trust was named the Margaret L. Greer Family Preservation Trust. The assets held within it, including the insurance payout and her interest in the rental property on Garfield, were designated for a specific and unalterable purpose. They were to fund a scholarship program at the vocational training school where she had volunteered for 11 years, providing tuition assistance to students who could not otherwise afford trade certifications. She had also included, in Harriet Cole's notarized language, a separate clause. Should any attempt be made by any party to petition for control of Walter Greer's personal assets through legal or financial instruments, the trustee of the Margaret L. Greer Family Preservation Trust was authorized to intervene on his behalf. The trustee was Pat Connolly. Margaret had named Pat as the trustee 2 years before she died. Pat, who was on the phone with me every other night now. Pat, who already had my documents. Pat, who answered in 4 minutes at 11:30 at night because she was already awake and already knew. I stood in the hallway closet of the house I had built my life in, and I put my hand against the wall to steady myself, and I understood something about the woman I had married that I had not fully understood, even after 41 years, of loving her. She had known something like this might come, not because she was a cynic, but because she paid attention when others looked away. She had built a wall while I was still thinking the weather was fine. She had loved me forward, into a future she would not be there to see. With the same quiet competence she brought to every single thing she ever did. I put the letter and the Bible under my arm and went to get the toolbox from the garage, because I had said I was going there, and I intended to be a man who means what he says. I came back into the house, and Derek was standing in the living room looking at his phone, and my daughter was sitting in Margaret's chair, the one by the window where she used to read. And she looked up at me when I came in, and something in her face was soft, in a way it hadn't been in weeks. She said, "I forgot how much I used to love this room." I said, "I know. Your mother did too." Derek looked at his watch. "Ready?" he said. I said yes. I held the toolbox in one hand and the Bible in the other, and I walked out the front door without looking back, and I did not let my face show a single thing. 3 days later, Pat told me it was time. She had spoken with Harriet Cole and verified the trust documents and confirmed that the insurance payout had never actually entered my personal estate in the way Derek believed it had. It had been redirected at the policy level before it was ever dispersed. The money Derek had been planning to access was already behind a legal wall he had no way of scaling. He had been preparing to steal a thing that was never available to be stolen. He just didn't know it yet. We arranged the meeting for a Thursday afternoon at Derek's office. Pat told me to let him set the location because it would make him feel in control, and a man who feels in control stops being as careful. Derek suggested his conference room, which had a long glass table and a view of the city, and was clearly designed to make clients feel that they were in the presence of someone whose professional altitude made them trustworthy. I said that would be fine. I said I was ready to get everything sorted out. I heard in his voice something that was almost relief. He thought the conference room, the altitude, the glass, and the view would tip whatever was left of my resolve. He had been patient long enough, and now he could see the finish line. I arrived with Pat. Derek and Raymond Cutler were already there. Raymond Cutler was taller than I expected, deeply tanned in the way of men who ski rather than work outdoors, with a firm handshake and the particular brand of cordiality that is really just performance. He greeted me like someone's favorite grandfather at a holiday party. "So this is the man himself," he said, and laughed as if we had an established warmth. My daughter came in behind me. She sat down and looked at Pat, and then at the folder in Pat's hands, and her expression did something I had been watching for. It did not do what Derek's did. His face stayed controlled and professional and warm. Hers went uncertain. She was looking at Pat the way you look at something you thought you understood and have just realized you don't. Derek laid the documents on the table with the ease of a man who has done this many times. He walked me through them, his voice smooth and reassuring, using all the same language he had used in my guest room over the last several weeks. Straightforward, formality, protecting your future. His eyes were pleasant and steady and completely confident. Raymond Cutler nodded along at the right moments. Two men who had decided how the afternoon was going to go. Pat opened her folder. She did not raise her voice. She placed 3 documents on the table in a row, spacing them apart, and said that before we moved forward, she wanted to make sure everyone was working from accurate information. Derek smiled. "Of course," he said. "That's exactly what we're here for." The first document was the complaint filing from 18 months ago. Pat identified it by case number and description without editorializing. She turned it to face Derek and Raymond and waited. Raymond's tan went one shade paler. Derek did not reach for the document. He left it where it sat and kept his expression where it was, which cost him something. I could see it. "That's a settled matter," he said. Pat agreed that it was settled. She said that it was nonetheless relevant context for the question of why a financial advisor with an undisclosed history of steering clients into unsuitable instruments might seek a limited power of attorney over his 20 says father-in-law's assets during a period when the father-in-law was recovering from a health event and had been encouraged to believe his own cognitive function was in question. The word encouraged landed quietly, and then just sat there. My daughter said Derek's name. She said it in the way women say their husbands' names when they want an explanation, and already suspect it will be inadequate. "Derek," she said. "What is she talking about?" The second document was the trust. Pat identified the Margaret L. Greer Family Preservation Trust by name and date of establishment. She explained the beneficiary designation and the asset protection clause and the identity of the trustee. She read from it without looking up, her voice even and clear, and the room got very still. Derek picked up the document this time. He read, and I watched the shape of the afternoon change on his face the way weather changes on a landscape. First a shadow, then a shift in the air, then something final and flat. He set the document back down very carefully, the way you set down something fragile, and he looked at me for the first time since I'd sat down. Not at Pat, at me, as if he were recalculating something he had gotten badly wrong and was only now understanding the magnitude of the error. Raymond Cutler stood up. He pulled on his jacket and said he needed a moment with his attorney and that this meeting had gotten quite complicated and that perhaps everyone should take some time and revisit. He was talking to the room, but he was moving toward the door. Pat said that would be fine, of course. She also said that the third document, which she placed on the table as Raymond reached for the door handle, was a formal letter of inquiry to the State Financial Regulatory Authority, which she had prepared and would be filing that afternoon unless there was a compelling reason not to. Raymond stopped at the door. He turned around. The practiced cordiality was gone. What was left underneath it was not pleasant to look at. He looked at Derek, and what passed between them in that look was the mutual recognition of two men who had each believed the other was the more careful one, and were now revising that assessment in real time. Raymond said Derek's name once, with a particular flatness, and then he went through the door, and we did not see him again. What remained was Derek and my daughter and me and Pat, and the documents on the long glass table, and the view of the city that was supposed to make clients feel certain they were in capable hands. Derek put his elbows on the table and put his face in his hands. He did not cry. He just sat with his face covered for a long time. My daughter was very still. She was looking at the trust document. She was reading it, I think, the part about the scholarship fund, the part about the vocational school where her mother had spent 11 years of Tuesday afternoons helping young people learn a skill they could stand on. She read that part, and her eyes went red, and she pressed her fingers to her mouth, and she made no sound. I had thought about what I wanted to say. I had thought about it for 3 nights running. I had gone back and forth between things that were true and things that were useful and things that were kind and tried to find the place where all three overlapped. I looked at Derek for a long moment. He lowered his hands from his face. He looked like a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had just set it down in the wrong place and watched it break. I thought of all the things he had said to me over the last 2 months, and I thought about the pharmacist asking about my cognitive function, and I thought about those 3 quiet withdrawals. I could have said many things about all of that. I chose to say only this. "You were in trouble," I said. "Real trouble. The kind that makes people do things they don't recover from easily. I understand that. But you brought my daughter into it, and you brought her mother's memory into it, and those are 2 things I am going to need a very long time to forgive." He didn't say anything. "Pat will be withdrawing the regulatory inquiry on one condition," I continued. "You are going to contact the clients from that settlement, the ones who signed the non-disclosures, and you are going to find a way to make them whole. Not Ray. You. Personally. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what you have to sell. That is the condition." Derek nodded once. Small and without anything in it that looked like dignity, but present. He nodded. My daughter was crying now, not loudly, just the steady, quiet kind that doesn't ask for anything. She was looking at the table and crying for things I could name and things I probably couldn't. I got up from the table. I was stiff from sitting, and my knee complained in the particular way it has complained since I was 55. I stood and picked up Margaret's Bible, which I had set beside my chair at the start of the meeting because I wanted it near me, and I held it in both hands for a moment. Then I walked around the table to where my daughter was sitting, and I put my hand on her shoulder. "Come home with me," I said. "To Birchwood Lane. Not right now, but soon. Come and sit in your mother's kitchen and have coffee, and let's talk properly, the two of us." Without all of this, she put her hand over mine on her shoulder. She couldn't speak. She nodded. That was enough. I walked out of that conference room with Pat beside me, and the Bible under my arm, and the city spread out through the glass behind me. The elevator was fast and quiet, and the lobby was full of people going purposefully in every direction. And I walked through it and out the front door. And the afternoon was cold, and the sky was the particular pale blue of late autumn. And I stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in. Pat stopped beside me and looked at me. "You okay, Walter?" she said. I told her I was. And I meant it in the careful way that honest men mean things. Not as a boast and not as a denial of everything that had just happened, but as a statement about the thing underneath all of it. The thing that Derek and Raymond Cutler had never really understood they were dealing with. I was intact. My wife's work was intact. The rental property on Garfield would stay in the trust and fund a scholarship for a kid who needed one. That had always been what it was for. I thought about Margaret reading that Bible with the cracked spine, making notes in the margins of certain pages, placing her bookmark carefully. I thought about her sitting across from Harriet Cole in some office I had never seen, being practical in her quiet, thorough way, protecting what she loved. She had looked at the people around me, and she had looked at the world, and she had made a plan. She had done it alone, and she had done it without asking me to worry because she knew worry was not the thing I needed. What I needed was to be held in place by something stronger than I knew was there. This whole experience taught me something I should have known already, but needed to learn again. The real assets in a life are not the accounts and the properties. They are the integrity of the people who stand beside you, and the wisdom of the ones who loved you well enough to leave something true behind. Margaret had spent 41 years watching me work and watching me trust too easily and watching the world try to find a way around the things we had built together. She knew the structure better than I did, and she had reinforced the foundation years before anyone came with a crowbar. I will carry her letter in my wallet for the rest of my life. Not because I need reminding of what she did, but because I want to be the kind of man who deserves to carry it. That, at the end of everything, is the only project that has ever really mattered to me. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my position. And if you have a story about protecting what matters, I want to hear it. Drop it below.